Dr. Miller with 3 tips on isolation training you might find useful. Before I get started, be sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, comment on this video. Releasing videos all the time in the field of exercise, sports science, nutrition science, so I hope you find this one valuable as well. So 3 tips. First of all, let's define isolation training. Single joint exercise, typically a supportive exercise, is not your compound movements like bench, squat, deadlift, where you got multiple joints moving at the same time. Now, again, that's not always true, but for the most part, isolation exercises are more simple exercises, supportive exercises if we think of strength conditioning setting. Okay, so definition first. Second one is I'm going to provide some of these tips. Now, these tips are more so for people who are intermediate to advanced trainers. So if you're just starting out, I wouldn't really follow any of these. You could start to try some of them out, but you may not need them just yet. So what I mean by that is if you're just beginning and you're only like week 6 in your training, it'd be better to stick with the exercises that you've been using, have a little bit of rotation in them, maybe from cycle to cycle, but like 8 weeks at a time before you make any changes. And don't worry about tempo and some of these other things I'm going to suggest just yet, because you don't need that. Don't use it until you need it. Now, again, if you just want to try it out, that's one thing, but what I'm saying is you don't have to employ these tips. If you have been training for a while, you might find some of them useful, maybe already using some of them. So let's get to tip number 1, and that is tempo. Altering the tempo in some way. So slowing down the eccentric portion of the lift. So if it's a biceps curl, standing barbell biceps, brachii curl, an arm curl, elbow flexion, okay, whatever you want to call it. When you lower the dumbbell back or the barbell back to its starting position, that would be the eccentric portion of the exercise. Or if you held the position at any one time, so you could hold it at full length, you could hold it halfway, you could hold it at all the way to the top, that would be isometric. And there could be value in doing that as well. So I wouldn't spend a whole lot of, I wouldn't necessarily elongate the concentric time, the time they're actually curling the barbell. Don't go so fast you lose contact with the muscle, meaning that you don't lose tension. I'm not advocating that. But what I am saying is that if you're going to manipulate the tempo for the purpose of trying to increase muscle size and not just staying connected with the muscle, this is the eccentric and isometric portion is valuable. Now, mind muscle connection is certainly when you use tempo, is a valuable part of using tempo. So going slow so you can feel the biceps contracting, you have to really focus. You can feel that tension throughout the exercise. Same with the triceps. If you did a triceps kickback and held it at the top just for a second, you can really feel those triceps contract. That has value. And then, write it down maybe as part of the same rep. That would be pretty tough to do like a 6-second ride down and 4-second hold. That's a long rep. And so you can employ these type of things, though, tempo, some sort of manipulation. You could scale tempo. You're going to say, I'm going to do 4-second ride downs this week, then I'm going to do 6-second ride down next week, and then I'm going to do 8-second ride down next week. And then maybe I'll let the exercise fall out. So I'll do a different exercise. You could do the same thing with isometric portion, either riding, increasing those numbers with the eccentric or doing it separately. So I'm going to do this exercise with normal tempo, except for I'm going to hold at the top or squeeze the muscle at the top of, say, a biceps brachii arm curl. I'm going to squeeze for 4 seconds, then 6 seconds, then 8 seconds. And so, again, you're creating isometric at the top. You should see nice strength gains in that range of motion as well at the very top. The point is that you can alter one of these muscle contractions. If you do both, just be mindful. You're really ramping up the time under tension. So you may only want to do 1 second per week. 1 second to the eccentric, 1 second to the isometric. There can be value in doing this. It appears that mTOR responses are better, so it's part of the biochemical pathway that elicits muscle gains. If it's a exercise where you're increasing the length of the muscle, like doing a incline dumbbell biceps curl, so the arm is behind the back, right, just by virtue of sitting on the bench or the incline. So you're already pre-stretched, and that's going to be my last point, is some of these exercise varieties using these terms active and passive insufficiency. But you've already stretched the biceps muscle by virtue of sitting on the incline. You're really putting a lot of tension on the muscle to begin with. Then you're going to contract the muscle, okay? And so you have double stretch going on, then you contract the muscle while one end of it is still under tension. That can add sarcomeres in series. Sarcomeres are the contractile unit of the muscle. And so in other words, the muscle can get longer. And so muscles not only get thicker, they can get longer. And so doing that type of eccentric elongation type of training, especially in with muscles that can be stretched beforehand, can be valuable in terms of increasing muscle size. Okay, now there's a lot of hypotheticals here that I'm throwing out there, but this is where isolation training, I think, where tempo training can fit really nicely with isometric training along with the mind-muscle connection. Okay, so that's tempo training. You might just pick one exercise per session where you're going to do this. So let's say I'm going to do triceps, so I'm going to do it for my triceps exercise, and then next training session I'm going to do it for, I'm just using an example, I'm going to use it for biceps, right? Or if I'm doing some sort of lateral lat work or upper back work, I might use it as a single arm DB lat pullover, something like that, right? So it's only one exercise, because when you increase time and attention, especially some of these exercises like, say, a pullover, that's a lot of shear forces, a lot of stress on the muscle. So you don't want to do this for all the exercises. I wouldn't recommend it anyway. Pick an exercise of the day, employ the tempo type of work, and you can rotate which exercise and which joint needs that tempo. Maybe it's a part of the body that needs a little bit of help that's falling behind the other parts. This could be a way of trying something new to try to stimulate growth. And there's a lot of theory about what fibers this will get at. It appears that neurologically it could use a size principle motor unit recruitment to go ahead and recruit those big fibers. But the metabolic milieu when you do this isn't necessarily a conducive for muscle growth. So this is more of a tension type of attack, thus time under tension. Second one. So let's talk about the metabolic milieu and increasing that. So this next approach would be picking an exercise in your group of isolation exercises and focusing on extending the volume and going to failure. So an example again might be biceps curl, arm flexion, and so you're going to select that as your exercise of the day that you're going to go to failure on. You're going to allow to get a pretty massive pump. Again, I wouldn't do this with compound movements because the fatigue cost is going to be extremely high. I'd only do it with one exercise, because if you do it with multiple exercises, then you will start to incur fatigue. But you might pick an exercise and go ahead and go to failure with it. You might be working in the 12 rep range for most of your isolation exercises. This one you're going to run out to 15, even to 20 repetitions. And it may be one set, like a myo reps type of set, or it could be multiple sets, knowing that, if you've been doing 5 sets, you might have to cut it down to 3 with longer reps. But the point is you're going to change the way in which you train the muscle and pull it out of its current cycle. And what we used to call in the bro language, right? We're going to shock the muscle, okay? We're going to keep it off balance like it's a real person. But you're creating just a different metabolic milieu, especially again for those body parts that are kind of behind, or you're like, man, I'm not really seeing progress here. What else can I do? Try some increase. And it could be just simply through volume that you're going to see an increase. The volume, the 2 failure type of training on top of that could help in terms of metabolite type of training. Now, again, be careful with this. You don't want to blast your triceps and the next day turn around and try to do some overhead pressing. You're going to sequence it properly. So, maybe you have a rest day the next day and you're like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and whatever movement body part that I really want to blast, I'm going to go ahead and do some sets to failure here with a longer rep sequence, more repetitions per set, these particular exercise, and knowing that I get a rest day before I turn around and do it again. Because these small muscles will recover faster than the bigger muscles typically, especially the lower body. So, they're smaller muscles, they recover faster. All right, let's think of it that way in a simplistic sense. All right, the last one, the final one, is exercise variety. Okay, again, this is really when I'm speaking to people who are intermediate to advanced trainers. You don't want to rotate exercises so quickly. I've released videos on exercise variety, and I have a bias towards it because I see the value in it. And we have a couple studies that support this as being a big driver, a significant driver in seeing positive changes in hypertrophy and strength. Okay, now I don't want to overstate these studies. They're just 2 studies. They're not really, there's more to be done, but anecdotally as well, when I train people, this tends to have value. Plus, it relieves some of the joint stress. So if you keep doing the same exercise over and over again, the tendency is, if you keep doing the same lateral raise over and over again, that's the same joint stress happens on that shoulder over and over again. So it's a nice idea to change the angle at which the exercise occurs. That can also change the stress that's, where the stress is actually occurring on the joint. Those tissues get a little bit different angle in which they're stressed. And then, of course, the muscles are activated in a different way, or more muscles are brought on board. So here's 2 of the words that I'm going to work into this: active and passive insufficiency. And so I mentioned this kind of idea already, that somebody's doing that DB biceps curl, and they're on an incline. The arms behind them or behind the body cable curl. You've already pre-stretched the muscle, so you put it at a deficit by stretching it. In other words, it's not as optimal length. We're talking about the biceps brachiae here. And so when you curl, when you actually just do curl elbow flexion, you still have part of the muscle that's understretched at the shoulder, and so you're at a deficiency. So again, that can stimulate growth in the length of the muscle as well as the actual thickness of the muscle. That can be a valuable tool. Now, obviously, that creates a little bit of stress on the shoulder. So again, rotating this exercise out every 4 weeks, if you're an intermediate to advanced trainer, would be a good idea. And you know what loads you're going to use. You've done it before. You feel comfortable doing the exercise. Now, on the other side, again, you could work in that DB preacher curl, which is an active insufficiency. And so now your shoulder is in the position that's flexed. And so the muscle is already shortened before you begin. And so you do the elbow flexion. Yes, you're working the biceps still, and the idea was that you're getting this peak, right? You're working the distal part of the muscle more, perhaps. But what you're also getting is working muscles that are going to have to work harder than they did before. So brachialis would be a good example here. It only crosses the elbow. And so when you push the biceps in a deficient position, it's not contributing to elbow flexion as much as it did before. So now the brachialis has to pick up the slack and work harder. And in so doing, it could get bigger. So it could have, it could be hypertrophied, and there push up the biceps a little bit since it sits under the biceps. So again, changing position, okay, changing the type of exercise, thinking about, even if you don't understand active passive insufficiency real well, just think of exercise variety. You know, a high cable curl biceps curl, a high position cable curl for the biceps brachii is very different, right? So your elbow's up in that high position, you're curling here. I mean, you already have the shoulder in a flexed position, in this case, even abducted. And so the biceps is activated in a different way than, again, some of these pre-stretched positions, or even just a traditional barbell curl or a drag curl, perhaps, okay? And so looking at ways to, you know, if you have 2 biceps exercises in a week, target the biceps in a different way. You might have a traditional type of exercise where you have optimal overlap, like a traditional biceps, barbell biceps, or DB curl, and then one of these other positions, active or passive insufficient. Now I'm using the biceps as an example. It's a 2-joint muscle, and so it's easy to do this to it. In other words, put it in passive or active insufficiency. But think about the brachialis as well, even if it's just a single joint exercise. By changing the joints that are associated with the angles with the exercise, you will change these other muscles' activation as well, is the point. Okay, and so, you know, by pre-stretching the rectus femoris, if you did a cable knee extension, and I haven't seen too many people do these, but I work them in occasionally, is, you know, having the leg behind you and then swinging the leg forward while you're going in hip flexion, you extend the knee. Well, that put the rectus femoris at a deficit to begin with because it was in passive insufficiency. That means the other quadricep muscles may have to work harder, and the hip flexor may have to work harder. Hip flexors may have to work harder than they did before because the rectus femoris was in a bad position to begin. Okay, I'm just using an example that position. You know, even if the muscle that's being targeted, you know, the idea with the biceps, you think, well, not all the muscles are 2-joint muscles. That's true, but by changing the angle in which you perform an exercise for a 2-joint muscle, you will change the amount of muscle the force contribution from the other muscles associated with the exercise, and they may be single joint muscles like the brachialis example. Okay, changing, you know, the way you do a DB lateral raise. I mean, how many different ways is there to do that, right? So if you do a leaned out DB lateral raise, you're taking the subscapularis out of the position, out of the you know, the force contribution because of that first 20 degrees. Now, when you clear the shoulder level and you go over, you know, more towards overhead position, you're getting more of the upper trap fibers. You know, if you do a butterfly DB lateral raise, butterfly DB lateral raise, you know, now you're getting subscapularis and lateral delt, and then you're getting the upper trap fibers there as well as you go over the top with the dumbbell, okay, or the plate or whatever it may be. So again, those are different type of exercises. If you do a side lying incline DB lateral raise, you're going to get a greater stretch as you cross midline with the dumbbell. And so now that you know, the DB lateral raise is one that's creating an insufficiency as the muscle fibers are, you know, not optimally aligned in that lateral head. You're making that muscle work harder in a stretched position. So you might be adding sarcomeres in series when you do something like that. And then when you go over the side, you're not maybe getting as high up in the air, so you're not getting as much upper trap fiber contribution. So again, the whole point is that we're hitting the muscle in different ways. We're creating different tension. We're creating you know, different positions that if it's a multi-pinnated muscle like the deltoid is, that you could be hitting fibers in different ways since the muscle is designed to move the shoulder in different directions. Okay. So taken together, tempo training, increasing volume, going to failure, metabolic milieu type of training, okay? And the last one, exercise variety in order to hit the muscle in different ways, thinking about the first 2 examples and then also incorporating these different insufficiency problems, where that's not really a problem, but insufficiency positions, so active or passive, and how those changing positions will affect the muscles that contribute to an isolation exercise. Again, we're talking about isolation. I would not apply a lot of these ideas to a compound movement. Those movements will still be central to your plan, in my opinion, in any type of training, whether that's physique, bodybuilding, strength conditioning, you want to run faster, jump higher, it doesn't matter. Compound movements get the most bang for your buck. You're going to get the most muscle activation for per time, you know, especially if time is valuable, which it usually is. But when you're looking at isolation, these are options that you could look at. You don't have to do all of them, but maybe try one or two and see if that helps get you out of a rut that you might be in your programming, and also jumpstarts muscle growth or strength. If you've seen that certain movements or parts of your body have flatlined. You know, if you're looking at your deadlift and it needs some bolstering, you can decide maybe there's a certain muscle group that could use some help off the floor, right? Or your quad's underdeveloped or whatever, you know, whatever it needs to be, you could throw in the isolation work using some of these techniques as well in order to keep the gains with a Z, capital Z, coming. All right, I'll see you in the next video.